third session of the French Film Festival, Glimpses of Contemporary France. We have Abhijeet Ranadive with us, who will lead the discussion today on the film Love and Me. Abhijeet teaches and writes about cinema, visual art, media, and technology. His writings are published in mainstream Marathi newspapers and periodicals. He also works as creative head and member of the selection committee at the Pune International Film Festival. Welcome, Abhijeet, and over to you.
Thanks, and good evening, everyone. Um, so this is the third in our cycle of four French films, and I think today's film is quite different from what we've seen earlier. I mean, when I chose the four films, I tried to get a sense or get a certain variation in their themes as well as their treatment. So. This film is by Mia Hansen Love, who's a fairly well known French director, and her style is quite unique, especially if you consider today's French cinema. Though people who have seen maybe films by Eric Romer, for example, or some of the other French New Wave films, they might see certain similarities. So if we talk about the structure of the film, it's fairly simple in the sense that you have in the beginning you have a certain state of equilibrium where husband, wife, children. She has happy, apparently happy family. She's happy teaching students. She's happy in her job, and her books are being published as well as apparently prescribed by universities and so on. So that is a kind of a fulfilled life that this woman Natalie is leading. And then, of course, that state of equilibrium is disturbed by a series of crises. And then we see by the time we reach about 1 hour in the film, the crises have hit or they have become full blown. And she has a real what you would call a personal crisis in her life, in the sense she doesn't know what to do with her life, in a sense. And then, of course, the film ends in another state of equilibrium where again things have become calmer after the storm and so on. And she seems to have found a way out, or we don't know what that is. So we'll talk about that. So that is at a very high level the structural composition of the film. But then what is interesting is what the crises are, and how they're not just a series of personal crises, but also, in a way, these are glimpses into what France, the country itself, is going through in many ways. Um, so to start with a bit of again history of where we are in France at that time. Um, we see the students' manifestations, or where this was I believe this was 2010, and this is the era when Nicolas Sarkozy is the president, and he introduced pension reforms, which were treated by these strikes and these student manifestations and so on. So, at a very basic level, without getting into too many complexities of what the reforms were, what this means is that the state or the government is saying that uh, to give you your full pensions, the state doesn't have enough money, and therefore everybody, to get their full pensions, they will have to work for longer periods. So if you remember, the students at some point ask her, are you prepared to work till you are 67? And she says that yeah, I enjoy my work, and so I don't mind that at all. So that is the whole crux of that, what is happening in France at that time. So people will have to work longer for earning their full pensions, or they have the choice of not getting their complete pensions and retiring early, which is the normal retirement age or the earlier retirement age. So that is one point. The other point, of course, is what we see happening. So these are crises that are in a way not affecting her too much, neither physically nor mentally nor financially or any in any other ways. So the second crisis, and this is just what we see in the beginning, is just the beginning of the crisis, which is what happens at the her publisher's house. And it's something that I believe would be familiar to many of you who are, I believe, in the academic professions in some way or the other. And which is that, so the publishing house is a fairly well reputed publishing house, and we see what kind of books they are publishing. And she's of course a professor of philosophy, so her books are all philosophy books. And we see the names of people like Adorno and Foucault and so on being shown there. So these are books that these people have been publishing, and they are well reputed in their field, and the books are being prescribed by universities to students, and therefore obviously a certain number of sales are kind of guaranteed, you can say. And yet there are these two people from a younger generation who speak to Natalie with an older guy who's kind of her boss at the publishing house. He's present, but it's obvious that he has nothing to say, or he doesn't have the power to say anything really or do anything really. And the crisis, or the beginning of the crisis, is such that according to these people who are speaking, the very corporate speak or the marketing speak that we all are, I think, familiar with, in which they try to say that your books are not selling, and it's a problem. And we have tried various ways of selling them. And in a way, the new covers that they propose are a way of making these books more attractive. And they also talk about things like product placements. So you'll realize that for someone like her, who's from an older generation, she's horrified both by the covers as well as by the other ideas like product placements in philosophy books. But of course, we see towards the end, during the second scene at the publisher's house, that first of all, one book of hers is completely cancelled. So they are going to completely rewrite that book, and which is going to be prescribed as a part of the syllabus. And then one collection, that is a new book that is about to come. They say that because all the legalities were already taken care of and the contracts have been signed, we have no way of rejecting that book. But which is a signal that if we could, we would have rejected that book also. It's just that the legal contracts are signed, so we cannot do anything. So we are going to go ahead and publish those books. That is in a way saying that she has become outdated in her field of work also, and which we don't understand, at least in the beginning, completely, until the second scene, of course, and which comes after all the other crises. Um, and then, of course, the other parts of the crises start coming one after the other. Um, w- One is, of course, the fact that her husband is having an affair with someone. And this is also it's done very interestingly, if you actually consider how that happens and analyze that a bit. When the husband actually breaks the news to her that he wants to separate, and he has found he's met someone else, there's another girl in his life and so on. her first reaction is kind of uh, in a way saying that, yeah, you could have carried out your affair without telling me about it, and I wouldn't have cared much, as long as we are together, and we would have continued living the way we are. um, in a way that, without saying it explicitly, I think it signifies that he has probably had multiple affairs earlier, and they have been short-lived or whatever, temporary. Um, and in this one, the interesting or the important turning point in this affair is not that he has found the love of his life, but basically, and this is the way I see it. Of course, you're free to challenge that interpretation. But the problem is that the daughter and the son, they are aware of this affair, and they give him an ultimatum that he has to choose between Natalie and this new girl in his life. And so he is forced to choose. So it's a very interesting way of putting things across, especially if you have seen some of the contemporary politics around the Me Too movement in France, where a lot of people are coming forward saying that, in universities or very prestigious universities, there have been incidents of exploitation or abuse by professors and so on. And it's only now, with the Me Too movement in full swing, that a lot of people are coming forward with stories of their exploitation and their abuse. So it's almost as if saying that, these things have been going on for a while, and in a way, neither the husband nor the wife uh, treat it as something serious for which a marriage should be broken. Um, and the younger generation sees them differently, and they refuse to accept them as they are. uh, and they say, we have to take a stand, and we have to act on whatever we see happening. So this is not to say that the husband has been abusing his students, but one of the first questions that Natalie has for him was, uh, is it one of your students? So, in a way, it signals a few things. We don't know for sure. We cannot say for sure. And of course, later on, we actually see the girl, as Natalie sees her as well. And you see her reaction, that it is someone who's much younger than him. And she knows, when she sees that girl, she kind of finds it ridiculous, but also, in a way, it signifies that she doesn't think it's going to last longer. So it is not going to be the love of his life, with whom he's going to spend the rest of his life or anything like that. And which, in a way, is reinforced by the Christmas scene at the end. That you realize that, in a way, it is Christmas. He should have been, if he and his woman or girl are really in a serious relationship, then he should have been with her parents at her place on Christmas Eve, which he's not. So, in a way, again, it signifies, or we don't know for sure, but I think that their affair or their relationship, they have a breakup. I mean, the fact that she knows that he's not invited to his wife's house for Christmas Eve, where she's meeting her children, their children. So he's not invited there, and the other woman knows it, and knowing it, she hasn't invited him to her parents' place either, and they are not spending Christmas together either. So it's a very serious thing, and in a way, it implies that. Not all is well with Heinz and his new girlfriend. And so we see him as a sort of a forlorn figure who's lurking in the darkness when Natalie comes home. And, in a way, he's pitiable there. It's almost as if he's saying that can I not be there with you and our children for Christmas Eve because this is the situation that I find myself in? And you realize that she essentially drives him out of her house, and she even says, "I'm going to change. I need my the keys to my house back," and so on. So he's it's a very clear signal that she wants him out of her life. She doesn't need him anymore, and she finds him in a way pitiable, but not wanted anymore. And so we see how that crisis is. He has created the crisis. I mean, the fact that, of course, the children have also created it by saying that he has to choose, but then we see that he has made the wrong choice, because no matter what their philosophical differences are, and we'll come to that just a little later, but no matter what all those things are, I think he, in his own fashion, he still loves her and he would want to live with her, but he does make a wrong choice and he suffers the consequences of that. And the third crisis, of course, is the mother. And it's also a very interesting way of putting that crisis across. And we come to know details about the mother slowly as the movie progresses. But it's very interesting to note that there are very clear differences between Natalie and her mother, and yet there are similarities also. So the differences are obvious that Natalie leads an intellectual life, being a professor of philosophy, and you see even throughout the film how she's not just a professor of philosophy, but she's also well versed in what is happening in terms of current affairs, politics, and even uh, the new philosophers, as in terms of the book that she's reading, for example, which is about which is a philosophical tract about terrorism. And the book actually equates terrorism and anarchy, and of course anarchy comes as another thread in the guise of Fabien, the student that she has, her favorite student, in fact. But again, let's come to that a little later. Here, it suffices to say that so she leads a very intellectual life, and she is uh, very well informed in terms of the current trends in her subject, as well as what's happening to the country and the world in general. Whereas her mother is she's been a medical representative of sorts. She hasn't had higher education, as we come to know. um, she has been a model. She has played maybe bit parts in television series and so on. um, and what we see in terms of her life is what we see inside her house, which is photographs of the young woman, that she has been very beautiful and modeling. And also we see her love of beautiful things in terms of the dress that she has uh, bought and so on. So she is, in a way, she is very much a woman of the senses. She loves beautiful things, she loves artistic things, and her sense of aesthetics and so on. um, and Natalie, on the other hand, is very much an intellectual woman. And then, of course, the crisis in her mother's life is the fact that she has grown old, and she's depressed. She's lost touch with life in many ways. And of course, we see her sort of wither away when she's put in this home for the aged, and which is also, I think, a very interesting way of representing the crisis, that no matter what, regardless of all the tantrums and the midnight calls and the calls to the firemen and so on, the mother is still, regardless of her depressed state, she is happy to live, as long as she's in her own house. And then as soon as she's put in that home for the aged, through her comments we know that she finds that place depressing. She finds the other old people there depressing, and she doesn't even go out of the room. She refuses to eat, and essentially you realize that she loses her will to live as soon as she changes places and goes to this dreary place. And then, of course, the crisis becomes full blown when she dies. Um, then, in the little time that we have left, and of course, there are lots of things to talk about, but uh, one problem that Natalie faces is, in a way, her legacy of May 1968. And she mentions this in passing that even in 68, I was out when I was out there with the students, and a full blown communist and so on. And then only when I read Solzhenitsyn that I was disappointed and I came out of my leftist phase and so on. So you see a woman who is very honest to herself and to others about what she is, what she was, and so on. And also a woman who is poking fun at her, a person like her husband or her children, even for example, that the fact that despite all these things happening around him, her husband never changed his politics, he never changed his philosophy. And what it could be is something that we can guess, um, by the fact that he is German, by the fact that he is a very serious person whom his students fear. And you see the even the style, you never see her husband in his classroom or with his students, but with the kind of stories that are there, we understand that his teaching style must be very different from Nathalie's, where and we see her in her classroom where we see that even someone like Fabien, who is obviously very intelligent, he sees her as someone who's a key figure in his life, intellectually as well as in making him to be what he is today, which is an anarchist who's kind of who's refused the modern life, so to say, which is something that Natalie disagrees with. And yet, according to him, he she has been instrumental in making him what he is today. And of course, we see even her younger students during the vacations where they say that we are creating a website dedicated to philosophy, and would you edit our articles, and would you write a few things, would you write our editorials and so on. So in a way, even her students of 2010 engage with her, relate to her, which is not at all what Heinz's students must be doing, and that we are left to guess that, but that is kind of hinted at. um, so you see this whole crisis in which Natalie finds herself is also a crisis in a changing France, which is sort of socio-political upheaval, but also philosophical upheaval, and the changes brought in by capitalism, because both the pension reforms, as well as what we see at the publishers, they're both essentially France becoming more capitalist, more corporate, and so on, and in which a person like Natalie or people from her generation, and which is where even Heinz and Natalie are united despite their philosophical differences, and even Fabien is united. So, in a way, um, this triptych, as you may call it, which is Heinz at the extreme right, in a way. Um, with Nathalie in the middle and Fabien at the extreme left. All the three of them find themselves completely displaced in today's France, and which is kind of why I think the film is interesting and important in understanding what that France is. So I believe we have. I mean, there are lots of things to talk about, of course, but I think I'll stop here, and let's open the discussion. But closing this initial part, all I would say is that what I find very touching is that despite the film being fairly heavy in terms of its intellectual, uh, what do you call it, content, the film is also extremely sensual. You know, in a way, one of the, for me, one of the lasting images from the film is Natalie running, clutching at a bouquet of flowers, which is a very interesting detail, I think, because the moment, at one level, that is the last time that she's going to see that house and that garden, which she has lovingly developed from scratch, from zero. So this is her way of saying goodbye. And at the same time, she's going to see her mother, and she knows her mother's love of beautiful things. And so uh, the flowers represent both, the garden that she has developed from scratch, and her love of the sensual, as well as her mother's love of the sensual. So it's a link between her and her mother, you can say. And at the same time, that's I think that's the first time that we hear a piece of music in the film, and that is Schubert, also a very sensual piece and very touching, and very moving, I thought. So in a way, audio visually, and even in terms of the senses, that is, I would say, how the film represents France to me, in a way that it is sensual, intellectual at the same time, decaying in a way. And at the end of its tethers, saying goodbye to a lot of things that are dear to it, and doesn't know, and a country that doesn't know how to be. Or very much an existential crisis in the life of a country, I would say. So, with that, I think let's open it for discussion, and I'm very curious to hear what people have to say.
Okay, thank you, Abhijit. Thank you very much for your opening remarks about the film. Uh, yes, anyone with their question, comment? No? Yet to formulate your questions, your comments?
And by the way, so just the philosophical references throughout the film are also very telling. And I mean, I'm not a student of philosophy, so I get some of them, but not all probably. But possibly someone could write, I think, an altogether paper about. And yeah, I forgot to mention something. The film is also semi-autobiographical in the sense that um the director Hansen Love, her own parents were teachers of professors of philosophy, and I believe her father is of Germanic descent. Um, from where her surname comes, Hansen Love, um, and they're divorced, her parents. So I don't know how much of the details from her own life are in the film, but I believe she has borrowed some.
Yeah, Rajan, please go ahead.
Yeah, I found the cat very interesting, right?
I
And
was hoping that someone would mention that.
yeah, and it's called Pandora, right? So all the mythical references over there. Yeah, and one wonders that the cat is actually treating this woman as a part of the family because it gets the mouse back, right? And so she's been thrown out of that family, but the cat is getting it in, and she actually wants to get rid of the cat. So that's not very. There's some kind of discomfort that I felt over there, but otherwise it was a very well made film, right? It's not like the two we have seen before, right? I think that It's very well made. And the reference that you made to Schumann, she makes a reference to Schumann and Brahms. She says, and then they play a lot of English music, they play German, all that thing goes on. Yeah. But they are essentially romantic composers, right? Yeah. And so there's also this romantic tone of the whole movie, right?
Yes.
And it doesn't come across as a hard-hitting modernist kind of film at all. At least that's what I think. And yeah, and this anarchy and anarchism, right, is talking about, actually anarchy is supposed to be about getting an equality, right?
Right.
Though you have people like people who put Che as an anarchist, and people who put these kind of people also as anarchists, right? And that's where the author business. What do you think of not signing our names as authors, and who is an author, and all those Foucault references? What is an author, and all those funny things come up over there. Yeah.
Yeah, I find the cat very interesting because to me, just like Heinz, Nathalie, Fabian form a sort of a triptych, I think the mother, Nathalie, and the cat form also another triptych, which is a more sensual one. You realize that the cat also experiences a sense of loss of space. The mother also does that. And Nathalie, when she says goodbye to Brittany and her garden, she also senses a loss of space. And yet, at the same time, what is telling is that the cat finds a sense of freedom, because when she lands at Fabian's place in the woods, in the mountains, she's happy spending the night outside. And eventually, the cat goes to Fabian because, she is, in a way, she finds another place where she can be, and which is perhaps even better than living in an apartment in Paris, where she can roam around freely in the jungle and so on in the night, and still come back to the warmth of her home. So, in a way, there is a point where Nathalie says, I have found my freedom. When she is, I think, with Fabian in the car, and when they hear, I think, when they hear Woody Guthrie, if I am not wrong. So in a way, um, both Natalie and the cat, the sense of loss of space comes also with a sense of liberty, and it's only up to her to make the most of it. In a way, that is what I found the film seemed to say with the cat.
Yeah, Sanjay.
Yeah, the first sequence of the film is very important actually. When Natalie is sitting inside the boat, and her husband Heinz and the children, they're outside. And after that, they go to visit this tomb of Chateaubriand there beside the sea.
Yes.
And as it is already written there that Chateaubriand wanted to, I think the name of the writer is not mentioned there, but this writer wanted to be buried here near the sea to hear the sounds of waves and all that. And it is interesting that the name of Chateaubriand, um who wrote this book called Genius of Christianity in 1802, has been associated with an expression which it called a wave of passions. Wave of passions. It is actually there we see the waves of sea, and this expression was used in the Romantic movement in 19th century, and there were writers like Victor Hugo, who was so much impressed with Chateaubriand that he said once, which became very famous, that I want to be Chateaubriand or nothing.
Right.
Though it's a different matter altogether that he became far more popular than Chateaubriand, and today I think people remember Victor Hugo more than Chateaubriand. But otherwise, also writers like Lord Byron and Romanticists, they were much impressed. But this expression, the wave of passions, vague de passion, this was an expression which was introduced by Chateaubriand. So what happens that in this scene that the children, they are in a hurry to quit this place, and the daughter says that, I don't want to be buried with Chateaubriand here, and the son also. So both children, they quit the place, and then
Yeah, I think
after
the
that,
sun says the tide is coming in. So in a way,
yes,
it's
yes,
the very practical next generation.
yes, exactly, exactly. So that's very like prophetic, and so both of them, they leave, and after that, Natalie also leaves, and she's calling whether Heinz would also like to leave, but he stays there for some time, and then we see the change in his expressions. So it is something like, that reminding us of Chateaubriand saying that the heart is full of emotions and the world is empty. So, and his expressions are changing, and that is, and he stays longer than all other people. He says, well, I'm coming. So all of them have left, and he stays there, and camera focuses on his face, so we can see the changing expressions, and and the waves are coming, like tide is coming, the sun announces, as you already said. So that foreshadows in a way the story which is going to unfold in the film. um, and even the first the scene where she is correcting papers, the topic that she has given, the question she has given is that, can we place ourselves in the position of others? So that is a type of question which is probably the director is asking the
Right,
audience or the
right.
spectators, because in any work of fiction, whether it's a novel or whether you are making a film, that as a director or as a writer, you are putting yourself in the position of others, in the position of characters. So what are the challenges faced by a writer or by a director uh, by creating, when they create characters? So this first sequence I found very important, which tells a lot of things regarding the theme of the film also. Thank you.
And since you mentioned romanticism, I have to also say that um, there is a thread of romanticism that connects Fabien, Nathalie, and Heinz. And in fact, there is a scene, I think, when in Brittany, when Nathalie, I think, goes there for the last time, and then she has to leave abruptly, that where you see Heinz again looking at the sea alone. It's like I don't know. Some of you may have seen this famous painting by Caspar David Friedrich, where you see the typical. It's a very uh, many times it's used as to show the height of romanticism in painting, where a man is standing on top of a mountain or something with a mist in front of him, and we see, that is, the spectator sees him from behind. So that is exactly the pose that Heinz takes there. So we see that these three people, they have to make choices in their lives uh, to come to terms with this France that is changing, or the world that is changing around them. um, and then Heinz, in a way, becomes a tragic figure, because what we see him towards the end in the Christmas Eve scene is someone who has to um, go spend Christmas Eve by himself, uh, in a way, sad and lonely, uh, with no one else to be with. And then you see Fabien at the other end, who has renounced the world in his romantic vision. We don't know what is going to come out of that, and yet the practicalities beckon him. We hear, for example, when he says that as long as it's just the two of us, we are earning enough by doing what we are here. But if there is a child, then I don't know how we will be able to sustain ourselves. And then with these two men at two extremes, what we see is Natalie, who is a part of that romantic triptych, and however she is the only one who has the in a way the both the intellectual force as well as the physical and emotional force to stand in front of and confront all these crises and survive.
Okay. Any, anyone else would like to say something? Yeah, Ved, please go ahead. Yeah, Ved, you seem to have unmuted. Okay. Yeah, Kalpalata.
Yeah, I what I really liked in the movie is the continuity of time. Time never stands still, even if there is crisis in Natalie's life. For example, when her husband breaks this news that he is going to live with somebody else, but time continues and life continues in her life, and in the end she is really a strong woman intellectually, and it is her intellect which stands by her, and in the end it is her husband who is isolated, and her life is continuing, and she and the time basically I really liked how time is represented in film. It is continuous without any stop, and it is very rhythmic. Thank you.
Thanks. uh, I think Ved wanted to say something, but we
Yeah,
couldn't hear him.
Hello.
yes, Ved, go ahead.
Yes.
Yes,
Okay.
please tell you.
Okay. Hi. I'm Ved, and I think I'd like to go back to the point which we are speaking of about Heinz. We were talking about the opening sequence where they're at the beach and he waits back and stares at the sea. I feel that's a good way for us to have a look into his character, what he wants in life, because it seems like a man like him really needs someone to be there with him and stay with him while he stares at the sea, someone who would also continue to stare at the sea with him. And it's obvious, since his children left and his wife left while he stayed there, from his perspective, even though he's gotten close with this family, he's not satisfied. He The family that he has is not enough for him. He liked it to be more, which is why when he got the ultimatum and he had the option to stick with what he has or have the potential for something more, he went with his girlfriend, and didn't stick with his family. But then at the end, once you see his girlfriend and the potential that was there isn't really that much, and he comes back to the family that he had before, who were in fact closer to what he wanted than the family he and his girlfriend were trying to build. So I feel, one after watching through the movie and seeing the things that character does, I think it's interesting to go back to that starting scene and see how he interacts with his family and how his family interacts with him.
Yeah, very much so.
Thank
In
you.
fact, I found the scene with the strawberry is very interesting, where Fabien comes at this table where the family is eating strawberries. I mean, again, the strawberries being something very red and very sensuous, the way they are represented. Um, and it is, in a way, it is his opportunity, uh, which is lost, which is obvious from what happens in the scene, in the sense that both Fabien and Nathalie represent something which can connect him to life. The only thing he has to do is he has to come out of his shell, and he has to engage with life the way Natalie does. But I think instead of doing that, he chooses to poke fun at them. And which is why at the end of that scene, Natalie asks him, couldn't you have made just a little effort to talk to Fabian and be civil at least, if you don't want to be anything else? And which is his dilemma in a way that when she says that his philosophy, he hasn't changed his philosophy since the time that he was 18. It signals the fact that he's frozen as a romantic hero, as a romantic tragic hero, if you would have it. He's frozen in time uh, uh, when he was 18, at the time when he was 18. And even though now he's even past his middle age, one can say, because he becomes a grandfather at the end of the film. Um, he refuses to engage with life the way even Natalie's mother does, and Natalie does, of course. Um, so that is that scene gives you a sense of his lost opportunity, and I believe a turning point for him could have been, instead of ridiculing Fabien and Natalie, if he had tried to at least engage with her a little bit intellectually, I mean.
Yeah, that's definitely true. I definitely agree on you on that point. But I also feel that there were a few parallels between Heinz and Natalie's mother, because they both seem to be looking for something that they can call home, someone
Right,
who they can have with them, and they were trying to do so through Natalie,
right,
which is kind of what gave Natalie all this responsibility that she had to deal with. And then, which is why when it suddenly was gone, which is why she made the comment, "I'm finally free,"
right,
because she didn't have to be torn between these two people who needed so much from her.
right. So, in a way, what you initially sense as perhaps their interdependence, it's really Heinz's dependence on Natalie and the mother's dependence on Natalie.
Yes, yes.
Whereas she loves them in her own way, but if they do not exist anymore, uh, there are other things which give meaning to her life.
The narrative I thought was also structured in a way where you know sometimes there is a hint of what is to follow later, and one such very prominent hint I think is that in that publisher's office they are sitting and having a conversation, and the girl says the future is compromised.
Right,
So that is, like in a way, it is like Natalie's, what's going to happen in Natalie's life, like the future in her life is going to be compromised.
right, quite so. And interestingly enough, the French title of the film translates to future, whereas I don't know. Again, they have changed the name of they've changed the English name as things to come.
Mhm. Any more comments from others? Jayanto, yeah, Jayanto, please go ahead.
Not much I would like to say because I think everything is being said earlier. But I think we should also look at the part of the film which Natalie sees, you know, that I think in a way is very telling. It is about, I think it's called the certified copy or something like that, and in which the male protagonist is a writer who is talking about how in art nothing is original, you know, every copy is in its own way an original, and every original in its own way is a copy of something that has happened earlier. In a way, I think what she's trying to do, because this is also, I think, a kind of, let's say, it's a part of the autobiographical element of it. She has parents who have been teachers of philosophy. So all these names which are dropped, you know, Zizek and Foucault and Horkheimer and all these Frankfurt School, these are not dropped for the effect of it only. They are names that she has grown up with, you know. And that is precisely, otherwise it becomes kind of too pretentious, to use so much of intellectualism or intellectual things or signs or words. But here it happens very, very naturally. Everything we find is a series of contrasts here. There is kind of an open-endedness, Also the fact that she's a great fan of Eric Romer. Another connection is that she, like most of the so many years ago, so many directors of the French New Wave, she was also intrinsically associated with Cahiers du Cinéma. I mean, she was
Yes,
an
yes,
editor and she was a writer for that magazine, which kind of spawned the French New Wave, because everyone associated with it was also associated with that magazine. So, also she said somewhere that one film of Eric Romer that that so influenced her, particularly vis-a-vis this film, is one called The Green Ray, and I checked it up. The story was very much like this. Here, nothing is what it seems, The intellectualism of the 1968, the anarchism, in a sense, was phony because people read Solzhenitsyn and realized that it is more about Stalinism than about real freedom, about real anarchy. But then at that point of time, which she realizes when she adhered to this, it was a real thing for her. And probably the people, the present day anarchists, Fabian included, those who sort of don the garb of anarchism are less anarchist than she is because they are taking the easier way out everywhere. The husband, Heinz, who could have been, portrayed as an out and out negative character, a lech, going after younger women. But there is some stillness in him. There is a there is immediate. Therefore, it's not, Abhijit, you said that he becomes kind of heroic in the end when he is left lonely and nobody to go to, in Christmas. That heroic nature, the heroic aspect of that character comes through in the very beginning when he stands in front of the grave of Chateaubriand, and then he decides upon as to what he has to do at this point in his life. He has to be honest, and the people who are supposedly more open about these things, like the children, they force him to make a choice. That does not solve the situation at all. And also the fact is that how does Nathalie sort of react to it? She, it is only much later that she realized that she finds fulfillment in a real intellectual life, But at that time, her reaction, she doesn't scream, she doesn't shout, she is only expresses a kind of, a very naive way that I thought you will love me, for my entire life. You'll never stop loving me. So it is a kind of, she's not devastated. At no point of time she is devastated. And so everything there, there are two possibilities. There is a deliberate open-endedness to everything, which I find is the strong point of this film. Even uh, and the contrast, Woody Guthrie. I mean, again, one Joan Baez and Donovan and Woody Guthrie and Bob Dylan, we would associate these names with a kind of anarchic, free spirit of the late 1960s. But someone like Fabian, who seems to be playing this all the time in his car, but is also complaining that this is the only damn CD which will work in this car, So he complains about it. So his anarchism is fake. Even the, let us say, search for youth, always by Heinz, is a fake. What he actually needs is a stable, strong anchor, and which he doesn't find. So from the very beginning, I think that he's shown as a kind of a tragic character. And she is a free spirit in the beginning, Natalie, and she remains a free spirit to the end of the film, and this is something which he finally realizes. And then again, a song which pertains to the 60s, Deep Peace, Donovan, where something that after having gone through this turmoil, which didn't really affect her too, too much as a cataclysm. But she has come to terms with it. She's realized that she has what she has, she doesn't have what she doesn't have. And therefore, the sense of understanding, peace, acceptance that comes in is real. In that sense, that is what brings the whole circle to completion. It's a wonderful choice, and I really like the teaching part of it. So since many of us here are associated with the teaching profession, and we know, I think we find it particularly interesting. Even the earlier film was very interesting, the class. This, in a much more, let us say, profound way, affects it. What is it that makes our students, react the way they react? What is it that we are really able to communicate to them, to convey to them? She undergoes this whole realization through the actual process of living it day after day after day, not only through the books. Again, we find those corporatized youngsters who talk about what is important and not important in the world of publishing, in the world of reading, quote unquote. They are much let us say much less forward looking than this 50-year-old woman. So all these contrasts, it really give us the meaning of the film. And in that sense, it is postmodern and something which arises out of the French New Wave, but in its own way, in its own lived postmodern way. Thank
Thank
Thanks. I would just mention here one thing which I just remembered. The link between Natalie and Heinz. Uh, I found those all those scenes where when they separate which books you keep, which books I keep, and he leaves her a note in which there's a very telling sentence that says, "We've misplaced Schopenhauer." They're talking about, I think, the world is will and representation, and in a way, that is the crisis in his uh, life, that he has misplaced Schopenhauer, and what he has done is he has mistaken his lust for, or his desire for, this woman to be the force that will lead him to a better life. The other thing, of course, is they mentioned Levinas and difficile liberté, difficult freedom, I think it's called in English, which talks, I think, about this whole thing about uh, the only way you can in a way relate to life, or the future, so to say, is by teaching and imparting knowledge to others, and which is very related to what Natalie does right in the beginning. That scene where the manifestations are happening and her students are being prevented from entering the classroom, and she says, um, I mean, in a way, the way I read what she says there, the way I read that is like saying that uh, even I want to change the world, and the way I want to do it is by teaching my students. So let me just go ahead and teach them. So don't stop me from doing that.
Yeah. Yeah, Nikhila, please go.
Uh, yeah. So thank you for suggesting this film, and also thanks very much for all that was said till now, because that has kind of helped me formulate, I think, a little better what I think of this film. Um, what to me struck me about this film was, I don't know, the sense of unhappeningness. I don't know how else to call it. Not that the character does not feel emotionally wrought or whatever, but the film is constructed in such a way that it eschews showing what we might think are very key moments. For instance, the announcement of the death of the mother. So through the phone call, the coma, and then the very next thing that we realize is she's dead, and they're discussing, what kind of a life she lived, and the church, and what kind of service to have for her. Anything that has potential for becoming dramatic, I think, is kind of eschewed in the film. I don't know if it is, I don't think it is something to do with her character as much as the decision decision regarding what to show and what not to show on screen. To me, that's what it seems, because it's something that I have noticed also in other sequences. Again, when she goes to the farm where Fabian and all his friends are, in the end, they have this exchange. Fabian asks her, I hope you're not disappointed with me, or and then she says, I hope you're not. So, what is it that transpired that gave rise to? So, what was the expectation? What was met and what was unmet? It's not so explicitly stated. It is left to us. I think, as Jayanto said, so much is to be inferred, through the open-endedness that many of these things happen. Also, the sudden birth of the baby, for instance. There is a talk between father and daughter about whether she's pregnant, but she says no, and then we realize that a baby has happened. Again, the publisher, it sounds so insulting, humiliating, that she's being shown her place. And she makes out a case in some ways for herself, even though it sounds weak, by saying, it's the most prestigious book on your catalog, and but yet there is no sense of confrontation, and there is no sense of taking it. So plot points don't actually get treated as full blown plot points. So I felt that this was, and the announcement about the Heinz's announcement of leaving the home, and so on. So I felt that this seems to be a kind of method of filmmaking, a style of filmmaking that is adopted throughout the film. Also, that particular scene where she comes down and tells Fabian that she's not feeling well. So it looked like it was building up to something else, and nothing happens after each of those moments. So this is one aspect. The second aspect is, I want to respond to Abhijit, what you have been saying, and also I think a couple of others, about Heinz and Natali. I feel that in some ways it's also um, uh, it's a way of his inability to deal with someone who is in some ways so self-contained and independent. Maybe someone more dependent, clingy, or younger, so who will look up to him. I think none of, for me, that was the character of Nathalie was so fascinating. I mean, she's none of this. So, how does a man deal with, someone who is ostensibly not dependent in any way, on him? So, it also seemed not so much her crisis as much as his crisis, and the crisis of what he is and who he is in that marriage. So I thought that was also quite interesting. And of course, as Jayanto said, it was also a film one identified with. One does these things in class. One has these favorite kind of students. So it's also a film that I really enjoyed watching for the kind of character we saw on screen. It's very rare for films to take seriously what we do in a class. I mean, it's often like a caricature, but I thought this was the closest that one could, find oneself on screen. Yeah, thank you very much.
Thanks. I'll just say something about the style of the film. It is what I would classify as naturalism of a certain kind, in the sense that, just like you said, the actual dramatic moment, like the death of the mother, etc., are treated in a very unexpected way, because I think we don't expect the film to do it like that, and yet it is a very naturalistic way of doing things. So even the word death is not mentioned anywhere. So she asks, on the phone, when she receives that phone, she asks, so is she in a coma or something? And then from the shock that she shows, we realize that it's not as simple as that, it's something much more. And that's their way of showing that. And also, like you said, the scene where Heinz declares to her that he's leaving her for another woman, and the way she takes it. So it is, in a way, very, very much, it's naturalism uh, in a way, considering the kind of characters that these are. So the drama comes not from those kinds of things, but uh, from the kind of things that I mentioned earlier, like, just the fact that she's clutching a bouquet of flowers, while Schubert is running in the background and she's running. Um, that is the kind of things which lend the film its dramatic flair, you can say.
Thank you, Abhijit, for that. Anyone else?
Huh.
Yeah,
Yeah,
Jay.
I just add something to Abhijit's comment is that yes, the whole style of the film, the way it is made, it is just meant to tell a story as simple. Nowhere is she trying to create an effect, through editing or through the camera. It is probably just one step short of just letting the camera be and let everything happen in front of it. She does intervene, in between, but she keeps it to the minimum. That is what is so interesting about the film. That we realize that all by the time this film is made, all that she could have done by way of editing, by way of using the camera, by way of using sound and everything else, she chooses not to do it. And therein lies her strength as a filmmaker.
Right.
Arun, you wanted to say something?
Yeah. Am I audible?
Yeah, yeah. Please go
Yeah.
on.
Yeah. So nothing new, just adding to what has already been said. The most obvious thing that struck me throughout the film was the conflict, superficial at least, the conflict between the old and the new within the film everywhere. Uh, and it was quite paradoxical that the young people in the film, Fabian, the other students, the other uh, people who are manifesting, they are the ones who are espousing the old utopian socialist ideas, and anarchism and everything. We get to see a glimpse of Fabian's home library. He's reading Fourier, Proudhon, Bakunin, and all. Um, Whereas I think Nathalie is somewhat, at least I think, she's reading. Uh, she is of course. Uh, uh, she has written so many books about critical theory or something that those people at the publishing house says something like that. Nobody wants a. Uh, nobody is looking forward to an nth number of book on critical theory on Frankfurt School, something like that. Yeah. So, but she still reads. She's reading contemporary stuff. She's reading about terrorism, something related to Islamism, radical Islam, and all that stuff. And I thought like she had some very cliched dialogues as well in the film. Like she says, um, she says that I've been there, I've done that. Like when I was young, during 68, I also used to be like you. I thought that that is like the wisdom that comes with age, the usual thing. And also the children, when they were young, they seem to be quite indifferent to what uh, to the things that their parents are interested in. When they go to see the grave of Chateaubriand, uh, Heinz, like you said, he almost has a spiritual kind of experience there. He stops there for a moment and he kind of takes it in. But his children couldn't care less. They were bored. And the other thing was with the young publishing associates, you know, they think Natalie and whatever she's saying is outdated, and her aesthetics are outdated, everything. And also the thing about the narrative, like many noted, the narrative tends us to presuppose what's about to happen. And I think it worked very well. But one thing that I got wrong was that I thought maybe Natalia and Fabian might end up having an affair or something. So, okay, that's maybe my perverse thought process. Yeah, that's all.
Yeah, thank you, Arun. Any more comments, questions from anybody? Tarkeshwar, Sridhar, Nikhil. Yeah,
Can I
Nikhil,
ask a question?
please.
Um, I wanted to know why the character, I mean, Nathalie's character is shown to be so plain. I mean, is it because she is being intellectual, so she is dressed so frugally, like only thing that stands out when she is with her mother are her heels. So I don't know why this portrayal of an intellectual person has to be like so plain looking and least interested in the um, worldly things, so-called worldly things, or is
Uh,
it the influence of the biographical nature of the movie?
I have a feeling that it's very much deliberate in the sense that there is a certain contrast between the mother and the daughter. In that the mother has led a life of uh, you could say where she has a certain aesthetic in the way she dresses, in the way she uh, even decorates her house and so on. And compared to that, Natalie has led, no matter what, a very intellectual life. And that kind of shows in, I think, the fact that she's also a teacher makes a difference in the sense that perhaps she's not what I would call plainly dressed, but she's neither ostentatiously uh, dressed the way her mother is, for example. You see satins and you see designer clothes and so on.
Even
um,
Heinz is so well dressed. I mean, the
right,
suits that he
right,
has.
right, right. So in a way it is, and at the same time I think what I found very interesting was that she has a sense of beautiful things, and the sense comes across in various different ways. For example, the flowers on her table, and also the fact, for example, when um, her husband, after leaving her, has come to the house and has carried, I think, some of their books and so on. Um, and he's left her a bouquet of flowers, and she goes mad and she throws them in the trash can, if you remember. I think that kind of a
Yes.
reaction also is very telling, in the sense that there was a time when she would have liked him to get flowers for her, and she does like flowers, but that is precisely the reason why, when he brings her flowers at that particular point in her life, she hates that. And that kind of reaction cannot happen unless you have a sense of beauty. So in a way, what she does and the way she dresses, um, is I think it's a very conscious choice. and which does not betray, or which does not mean that she doesn't have a sense of, she doesn't have an aesthetic sense, or she doesn't love beautiful things. And I think which she definitely does, is just that she refuses to be beautiful, if you see the difference.
Um,
Okay.
al- Also, specifically about the dress code, I feel ki it's a sort of reflection of how her experiences have shaped her. As far as we know, she like they keep saying she used to be a communist and she used to be radical, and she's come back from that life. So, and on top of that, she married a person who's very much on the right, and obviously hasn't been different since he was 18. So it's very much a reflection of what she has learned from her surroundings, what she has learned from her past, has learned from her husband, and it feels like just by experiencing the things that she has, she's chosen to be in the center. She's chosen to be neither left nor right. She's chosen to be plain, like what he was, like what Mr. Abhijit was saying. She knows what she wants to wear, but she chooses not to implement it into her dress code.
Right.
I think the important point is that it is plain, but it is her choice.
I'll just come in for a minute here. If I'm allowed to. Uh, Actually, I think uh, it's probably, I will not put it that way, that she chooses not to be beautiful, because um, she is shown as beautiful. I mean, she doesn't make too much of a big thing about, being ostentatious about even the husband. I mean, he's not really dressed in a very, very ostentatious manner. He wears whatever clothes a man in his social position will wear. He wears a tweed coat, he wears a linen shirt, and that's it. And she is always shown to carry herself with a certain kind of nimbleness, with a certain kind of grace, with a certain kind of confidence. She walks straight, nothing makes her bow down, and she has that kind of a vivacious nature which is able to withstand any little challenge which life is inclined to throw at her at any point of time. So I thought she was beautiful, you know.
Yeah, I think in fact grace is the right word, in the sense that no matter what happens, no matter where she is, um, she always has her self-respect and her grace, and which is what I think makes her beautiful. So it's almost as if, the beauty comes from within, and not through her clothes, or not the way she's made up and so on. uh, and in a way that is very striking, I think.
Actually, I was coming in from the point of view of sensuous against not interested in that. So why not have an intellectual who is also beautiful, looks after herself and or himself, and then doesn't shy away from maybe showing off. So why is this tendency to have an intellectual who is very plain and believes in grace rather than beauty?
It's
You just
the way I would put it is that, in a way, how can one put it? So you also realize, when Fabian asks her, after learning that her husband has left her, he asks her, or he says, perhaps you'll meet someone, and she says, I think in a very practical way, but also in a very realistic, or uh, it's almost as if she knows herself too well. So she says, with an older man, no, I wouldn't want that. And with a younger man, no, I don't think that's my type either. So, in a way, she's so self-sustained or self-contained that she doesn't need these external things to be beautiful. what the rest of the world thinks as, what a woman should be like, or what a woman should dress like, and so on. That's the way I saw it.
Yes, I understand as a character that is very logical the way she behaves. But then I'm asking about the choice of the director when he decides to have
She
a okay, okay, it's a woman. So she decides to have a protagonist who is highly intellectual, very independent. So why not also show her to be really, really good looking? So I'm asking you about that. So don't you think that would have been more assertive in a feminist way as well,
uh, well
showing her to be sexually also really dominating?
yeah, in the sense, it's not in her character to be voluptuous in any way or sensuous in any way, and yet she's also dressed according to the weather. If you realize that, when you have scenes in the summer and when you have scenes in colder weather, you actually see the difference in the way she dresses. So
Oh no, that is because she is cast as that particular character. I'm asking before actual the shooting begins, when it is still at the stage of screenplay and characterization. Why not conceive of a protagonist who is like this rather than what she is right now?
Right.
uh,
So I feel that the answer lies within the life of the director. As Ms. Abhijit mentioned, it's likely to be a semi-autobiography. If that is truly the case, then it's also likely that the character resembles someone in the director's life. The director wouldn't want to stray away from the story that they want to tell, and if the story, their head, is envisioned with a person who looks the way Natalie does and dresses the way Natalie does, she's not going to cast outside of that, or nor will she get the main character to dress in a different way from that image she has in her head, the image that the director has in her head. So I think that is the reason why, despite their opportunity to have an intellectual character who looks different from the norm, they didn't change that because they were trying to follow the director's image in the director's head.
and I think it's also a question of consistency. So the way she is now, somehow I find that it's more consistent with the character, meaning her appearance, her dress, as well as the nimbleness of her movements and everything. It's also consistent with what she is as a character.
Mhm.
If if I can come in at this point, Gita,
Yeah,
about
please,
this,
please,
yeah.
Nikhil.
To answer it somewhat flippantly, because it's not a Hollywood film, I think this is the aesthetics that you see on the screen. But also, another, I think, a very interesting choice is the film is giving us these huge leaps of time so many years later, and yet the character kind of doesn't change dramatically. The external appearance, I mean, does not change dramatically. So in the beginning, one is a little confused. Is it the same person? Are we seeing someone else? Is it the same character? Because we expect a kind of if it's 10 years later or whatever, we expect a certain way in which aging on screen is kind of represented, and that's not there. So I think these are very interesting choices that the film makes, stylistic choices that the film makes. I don't have much to say about plain looking or plain dressed. I think these are just matters of one's own aesthetic interpretation. So yeah.
It's also interesting to note here that the actress who plays Nathalie, Isabelle Huppert, so she is what would be considered as the giant of French cinema. I've seen her from her young age in so many different roles and doing so many different things that it's very hard to forget that she is what she is. Uh, and I have a feeling that even to the French audiences, she's one of the most familiar figures. So that's also one way of understanding why she is the way she is, possibly.
Okay. Yeah, Sanjay.
Eh, Yeah, there are certain things which are told indirectly or hinted through images. So mostly I like to talk about the books, the kind of books these characters are reading or they are keeping in their shelves. So those books also tell or at least hint about their characters or what kind of vision they have in their life. So we find that Heinz has been missing Schopenhauer, and he translates Nietzsche's book, L'Aurore, the Break of Dawn, something like that in English. And he is also, these books are disappearing from the shelf. Emmanuel Levinas's book and then Martin Buber's book are missing. And as far as Natalie is concerned, Natalie has been engaged with, at least in her writings, because she is the one who has directed this collection, in which Fabien has written a comment on
Adorno.
Adorno. So though we find her looking at her past, that she has been a communist, and now but still she is at least with the Frankfurt School, and but otherwise she looks more as liberal, who is not very much interested in politically engaging with, because we see when the demonstration is going on and she comes and says that I'm not here to express my political opinion, and I'm teaching. And then later on also we see that Fabien is in a way criticizing her. She is appreciated by Fabien, but Fabien also criticizes her, and he says that you'd have been more politically involved, more active, and in a way he says that there should have been some connection in your between your thoughts and actions. And so she is projected as someone who has some uh, progressive ideas in her thoughts, but somehow they do not come into practice. And she says that she has been there, but Fabien again says that probably it is just private, it doesn't come into the public. So it's like someone who has been a communist at least for a few years and been disenchanted by Stalinism after having read Solzhenitsyn, and who has come to be like a liberal. So we find her quoting, for example, Rousseau in the class, and she has asked this question. This is again seems to be a kind of comment that democracy is not good for the people, because that is what appears in the statement of though there are contradictions, of course, but Rousseau, as it is a famous sentence taken from Social Contract, the book, that the if God had something like a kind of government, then they would have,
Sionema,
yeah,
if we had uh, if the country was made up of gods, I mean, I'm kind
uh,
of translating from French. If the
yes, yes,
country was made up of gods, then we would have a perfect democracy,
democracy.
but which would be unbearable in a way.
Yeah. So, but
If I'm translating correctly.
but this is not fit for the people, for the common, like human beings. Okay.
And
So in a way,
she says don't misinterpret it, because you have to realize that
exactly.
this was used by the revolutionaries.
Yes. So exactly, that is something like she's also reminding her students that we have seen, for example, Robespierre in French Revolution quoting Rousseau and saying that the king has violated the general will. And Rousseau says in Social Contract that if the sovereign violates the general will of the public, then the people have right to revolt. So it's like something which was quoted. His ideas were used in French Revolution, though he himself was not like a revolutionary.
Revolutionary.
Yes. So that is mentioned. So in a way, she is defending herself. Natalie is defending herself. And when we find these marketing people discussing about the changing of the cover of the book or the content of the book, and so they are also, I think, suggesting not to give the comment like Fabien had given. He has commented on the book of Adorno. So let the people read directly. So that also is a kind of excuse to say that, do not, try to present the book as neutral, quote unquote. So that's kind of liberal stance that, so do not let the people read it in a radical way or more politically engaged way. So for that, I think Fabien has found a solution, because he talks about alternative publishing house. So where he can or his friends can publish the kinds of books they have been writing, or they have been reading or promoting. So we find then the bookshelves of Fabien there, where he has been reading an array of writers, which are like from right to left, and also liberal, and all kinds of writer he has been reading. And that's why there are certain scenes where it is hinted. For example, when Natalie picks up the book of Raymond Aron, I don't know whichever book of Raymond Aron is there, and she makes a face as if, and she says that, oh, Raymond Aron. I mean, how come? Because Raymond Aron is supposed to be a rightist, a friend of Jean-Paul Sartre, but he was a rightist. And so that shows that he has been reading rightist and the leftist like Zizek. On the other hand, anarchists, obviously, as Arun has mentioned, like Bakunin is there, Proudhon is there. So the new way of that shows in the character of Fabien that he wants to read all kinds of writings, not simply because someone like who has got disenchanted with communism, so stops reading. He reads Marxist. He himself is supposed to be an anarchist, but he reads all kinds of writers. Those who are supposed to be rightist, or the leftist, or those who are Marxist, or those who are anarchist. So that shows that the character of, in a way, eclectic character of Fabien, though he is more inclined to anarchism, and he practices that also, because that is what he has been complaining against Natalie, that she doesn't practice what she thinks. Because they have been trying to evolve some kind of autonomous life, more self-governed life, and economically also they have like donkeys. They have this what you call cheese making. He says that I'm going to make cheese, so to sustain themselves, though it all sounds a bit romantic in the modern world. But he has been trying at least to make some kind of connection between his thoughts and his actions. So all these three characters, they are represented through the kinds of books they have been reading and keeping on the shelves. So even, for example, the book of this one, the obsolescence of man, which I think is shown when Fabien comes to Nathalie's place for the first time, and we find that I think he wants to write a comment on that book by Günther Anders, and in which is like a criticism of the life full with the technology, where
Right.
Yeah, the government is trying to control through indirect means rather than by brute force. So and he wants to write a comment on that book. So all these books, whatever they have been reading and keeping on their shelves, they have some meaning. It's not just to display their intellectual superiority. And obviously she is a philosophy professor, so what kind of, I mean, obviously her life itself is like, um, spent in reading books and writing and discussing with the students. So all these three, even the Ains is also a philosophy professor, though he is projected as very authoritarian, as he threatens students that I know your face and you will face the consequences if you try to stop me, something like that he says. So that I found interesting, that through the images certain things are hinted. They are not told directly, they are understated, but it is up to the audience to interpret them and to make whatever meaning out of them. So, thank you.
And thanks. In this respect, I'll also mention the scene during the vacations where the students come to her place and they're talking about setting up a website and so on. So, in a way, that's also a hint at what is to come, because the kind of on the one hand, the kind of commercial pressures that her publishers have, because of which her books are not going to be published anymore by them and so on. And then there is this completely new vista opening up, which is you just a bunch of students can run a website devoted to philosophy, and if interesting people come together and put some writing online, then the students themselves would have no problem in treating that as authoritative or as a site of reference and so on. And which is where I think she's more connected to the future than even somebody like Fabian, who's still thinking in terms of the obsolescence and what you discussed about technology and so on. That for him, technology is something that what Gunther Anders has said, whereas she is completely open to this idea that you can have a website about philosophy, and she says, yes, I'll help you and I'll write things for you and so on. So there's also, I think, a very telling difference between Fabian and Nathalie.
Okay. Any other comments? Parkeshwar, would you like to say something?
I was hesitating to say anything because the discussion was about the characters rather than the theme. But of course, in order to understand the theme of uh, the movie, we need to understand the characters too. But let me begin with where uh, Sanjay left about philosophy books. So I think somewhere maybe it is far-fetched. I thought the film is about uh, different significations of philosophy itself. Uh, Roughly, I make three kinds of significations about philosophy within the play. One is people who think that philosophy is something that is not related to their life. Uh, some I think, especially represented by uh, the kids in the family, the son and daughter, and then the philosophers, professors of philosophy who teach quote unquote philosophy. That is where philosophy is a body of knowledge which has to be disseminated, and you might own it or you might not own it. That's a different issue. And then the other group, which is referred to as anarchist group, which tries to build uh, the difference between the action and thought. So philosophy and life. So it has to go together. Philosophy is life, and life is philosophy. And then life as a body of philosophy as a body of knowledge that has to be uh, disseminated or passed on to others. And then philosophy has nothing to do with life. It's completely another layer altogether. So these three uh, significations of philosophy seem to be in operation within the uh, movie, I thought. So that's what I thought is interesting about this. That's why there's so many references to various philosophers, schools of thought, and even epistemological categories. But that apart, what I found intriguing was Nicola hinted it that this gap of 7 years. So the first scene as it is in isolation, or it's a kind of preamble to the entire movie. So there is a between this preamble and the entire movie, there's a gap of 7 years. That jump, what it is suggesting is something that I was wondering, and about the title also, because Abhijeet touched upon it. Uh, Things to come. So that's what it is in English, but I don't know in French. And future is what he said more uh, kind of translation of French thing. So in that sense, uh, the conflict within the West about the modern institutions, begins with a crisis in the modern institution, in educational institutions, and then people are questioning uh, running of classes, and then you bring in Rousseau and others who were instrumental in conceptualizing these modern institutions. So the uh, philosophy of modernity, and then the 1968 is referred to by the students, which questions the some of the basic tenets of uh, this modernity and modern philosophy. And these two clashes, and then we have a reference to uh, the radical or the left and other things. Uh, and then we also have the changes that are happening, which are yet to be comprehended. Uh, so in that sense, that crisis is also seem to be running through the uh, film. So this is what I thought. I don't know whether it's some of these things are far-fetched. Thank you for allowing me to express my views.
Thank you, Takish. Would you like to respond to that, Abhijit?
Yes, in a way, what you say makes perfect sense, because those the three classifications that you said were there. Um, Apart from the children of Heinz and Natalie, I would also put the young people at the publishing house at the same place, and which is all the more pitiable because they are, in a way, they are behaving completely in terms of profit and loss, and nothing to do with what is interesting, what is important, what should be given to students of philosophy by the publishing house. They don't need, they don't want to have anything to do with that. Their only job is to make sure that the profit and loss statement of the publishing house remains healthy. um, and the children, in a way, the children are a tragedy because, despite having parents as philosophy professors, the children of Heinz and Natalie seem to be, in a way, Philistines. They don't seem to have imbued anything from their parents. And in a way, I think the film is saying that the future of France is uncertain because of that whole generation. People like Fabien who are younger, but who have gone away. I mean, they've rejected all this. And then we have the corporate speak kind of a language, and those people at the publishing house. So in a way, the future of France lies, and of course, not to forget Sarkozy. You see how her mother reacts to Sarkozy. I, I thought that was very interesting because it is the pension reforms with which the manifestations, against which the manifestations are happening. They are very much things brought in by Sarkozy, and in a way, his he changed France in that way. That is what seems to be said there. So that uncertain future is where people only understand the language of money, and your domain philosophy, which has much to teach, perhaps the future about how to live life and what priorities one should have, and how to even govern a country. But the future generation probably wants to have nothing to do with it. And in a way, that is the if you look at, apart from the characters, if you look at the overall flow of the film, then I think that is the direction in which it seems to hint, I would say. So it's from a country that was at the cultural center of Europe, and then, so to say, Western world. The country's gone to the dogs in a way. That is what it seems to hint at, I think. And the only glimmer of hope is, uh, people like the students of Natalie, who want to create that website, and who are still interested in philosophy, who retain some of the idealism, I would say.
Okay. Thank you, Abhijit.
So
Yeah,
the
Karthik.
director herself is a daughter of two philosophy professors, I thought.
Yes.
Any more interventions? Uh, okay, in that case, we come to a close. And next week, we meet again for the final session of the film festival, Glimpses of Contemporary France. Thank you very much, Abhijit, and thank you all for participating. Good night.
Thank you. Good night.
Bye.
Thank you.
Good night.
It was a lovely discussion. Thanks, everyone.
Yeah.
Bye bye.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Good
Thank
night.
you very much.
Thank you so much,
Thank
everyone.
you. Bye bye. Good night.